Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan, and today we're going to be going over institutions and social structures and using that framework to better understand the American social class system. So, there are three main goals I want to get done through this inquiry. The first one is to explain the American social class system, specifically how the country's social units build and operate to shape the societal framework that the nation runs on. The second goal is to examine stratification within key institutions throughout American society. And so there's various different institutions we could look at, but the three ones I want to focus on in this little video is religion, education, and politics. The third goal is to evaluate social institutions through both a functionalist theory perspective and a conflict theory perspective to further show the sociological significance of this. All right, so before we begin, it's important to go over our important terms. So, social structures refers to the social envelope that surrounds us and establishes limits on our behavior. Examples include culture, social class, social statuses, roles, groups, and social institutions. Social institutions are a little bit step below that. Those are the organized, usual, or standard ways by which society meets its basic needs. So these are kind of the smaller parts that ultimately make up the social structure. So this includes education, the military, religion, medicine, and politics. And then the last term we have here is stratification, which is a division of large numbers of people into layers according to the relative property, power, and prestige. Examples include slavery, the caste system, class system, and the US follows a class system that is more open, but is based on money and material possessions that restrict it. This is a good visual to kind of show how all of these components are layered and how they are smaller pieces of a larger overall pie. So it's a great way to refer back to this. It helps kind of simplify this whole explanation, this whole process. So the first institution is politics. So the needs within that are to fulfill governance, conflict resolution, and policy making decisions. Um, Although this can be useful, it usually ends up impacting the wealthy and the elite in more biased and favorable ways through their power. Groups include political parties, legislatures, interest groups, and lobbying organizations. And these effectively act as mechanisms for the wealthy and the elite to leverage lobbying powers and to influence policies in the expense for low income marginalized voices. Statuses include citizen, but it can be split up between voter, legislator, lobbyist, etc. Access to power and political influence is heavily stratified. As I mentioned, a lot of higher status individuals, a lot of wealthy in the elite with a lot of capital, social capital, a lot of connections help reinforce that hierarchy through their powers of political influence. And then the values include democracy, equality, freedom, representation, but a lot of that is negated by some systematic inequalities like gerrymandering and restrictive voting laws. And norms include voting, civic participation, respecting democratic processes, my bad, and engaging in public debate. However, implicit norms, such as the wealthy having a lot of influence and say in our politics, helps normalize and perpetuate a lot of that stratification. Our second institution is education. As someone who works in the education, I'm pretty familiar with this. So needs include skill development, cultural transmission, and socialization. Access and quality may vary, though. Certain groups include schools, districts, tracking systems that ultimately place students based on their academic performances and needs. And families and educators also shape expectations across social class. That ends up affecting outcomes in the education system. Statuses include students who are labeled as honors, vocational track, or special education. However, this often aligns with their socioeconomic status. Middle class families actively engage with those statuses, but through expectation work, but working class families are usually constrained due to finances and limited social capital. Values include emphasizing meritocracy and equal opportunity, but stratification and social reproduction persist. Middle class families tend to utilize strategic adaptation within changing educational demands, whereas working class families have more stable but less flexible expectations, which ends up furthering the divide and stratification. So norms include attending school, completing assignments, respecting authority. Implicit norms include the tracking systems that we just mentioned, which further reinforces that class inequalities. Families differ in how active they engage, and a lot of that is going to depend on their socioeconomic class and their socioeconomic status. So the third institution is religion. So the needs of religion include fulfilling spiritual, moral, and community needs, offers belonging, a sense of guidance. Some organizations include churches, mosques, synagogues, and denominations, which often mirrors social class, as conservative Christians tend to be of lower income. So statuses include the clergy, laity, I believe, elders, deacons, and denominational distinctions. Religious affiliation does shape class perception, which does reinforce and challenge stratification based on the participation and denomination, which we'll get to the more specifics why through a conflict theory perspective a little bit later. Morality, charity, community service, and faith-based obligations fall under the values. Religion can legitimize hierarchies, but also promote social injustices, inequality, mobility, whether it's more conservative or liberal interpretations of scripture. Norms include attendance, tithing, prayer, and participation in rituals. Norms can reinforce social stratification, but they can also provide a pathway for social engagement and activism. Again, it kind of goes back to what interpretation is believed by the follower and the person who practices. So theoretical perspectives we want to get into are structural functionalism, which is defined as a theoretical framework in which society is viewed as composed of various parts, each with a function that, when fulfilled, contributes to society's equilibrium. A second component is conflict theory. That is a theoretical framework in which society is viewed as a composed of groups that are competing for scarce resources. So the main difference to keep in mind is structural functionalism. There's cooperation and a holistic framework. Conflict theory, there's conflict and competition. So theorizing these institutions through these perspectives. So politics, with a functionalist perspective, you views as that institution mainly prioritizing social order, stability, and ensuring society needs like security and governance. But through a conflict theory perspective, reflects power struggles and reinforcing stratification through unequal access and influence, going back to the elite and the wealthy having a lot of sway in our policy outcomes and policy making. Education. So a functionalist perspective would emphasize the needs of socializing individuals, promoting meritocracy, transmitting culture, and meeting economic and societal needs. But conflict theory would point back to the tracking systems and how a lot of that ends up reinforcing a lot of class disparities, whether it be low income people being on track for vocational or more wealthier, affluent families being on track for honors and AP courses that better align with college prep. And then theorizing institutions. So religion, a functional perspective, would emphasize the fostering of social cohesion, shared values, and providing of meaning in people's life. But a conflict theory perspective would look at the different interpretations of religion and how some of them could reinforce class disparities by justifying a lot of the hierarchies as orderly Dane. And so as a result, through the divinity of them, ends up getting reinforced and ends up being socially accepted, whereas more liberal interpretations might use the religious values to emphasize social injustice and inequality and using that to fight against stratification. So, conclusion and overall thoughts, the American social class system is directly shaped by social structures and stratification. And this further is used through social institutions, as we've seen through politics, religion, education. A lot of the groups, norms, statuses and values that are baked into those social institutions help shape the social stratification within them, as well as the social stratification around them. So stratification operates within these institutions, like I said, through the norms, values, and statuses, whether it be through social institutions on a smaller scale or that better contribute to the larger overall social stratification. And then a functionalist perspective would emphasize how institutions meet societal needs and maintain stability, but a conflict theory perspective would look at how it highlights inequality and social hierarchies, how it perpetuates those. And a sociological analysis through using these perspectives helps reveal how social structures both constrain and enable individuals.
The update on our time to the Lisa this morning. Due to strong current through the last night and port congestion, 3 ships arriving in the port